I would once again like to welcome to the stage our featured artists, theorists um, from yesterday, which is from left to right, Laura Naum and Petre Mogosov-Kayet. We have Rahel Molnar. We have, as what we saw today, Janina Weissengruber and Dustin Breitling. On my right is Louis Armand, who is a Prague-based writer, theorist, and also one of the head organizers of the Prague Micro Festival. On my left is Zsolt Miklós-Folgy, whose work we saw yesterday, and Daniel Hüttler, whom you saw today. I would very much also like to take this opportunity to thank Object Paradise for taking care of the video feed throughout these 3 days. It was quite an undertaking, yes. And I would also like to thank our sound crew, the third-party branch, who have been taking care of us these 3 days. So thank you very much. And as I said, we will be speaking for about the next 40 minutes. Then there will be a short presentation of some of the featured publishers, whom you can check out in our bookstore over there. Also, some of our invited guests have brought some free material for you to take from the back table, so I sincerely recommend. And after the featured publications, there will be a set by Noemi, so stay with us. It's going to be great. Now, I'd maybe just like to pick up on one thing which Daniel said in his presentation, because it sort of involves many people present here. As we spoke about, there was the Rupture conference, which happened about a year ago, featuring Kayet and Zsolt and Dustin, myself, Louis as well. And Daniel, in this regard, you said that the conference, and I hope I got it right, was trying to resolve a problem in contemporary theory, art, and philosophy. And I didn't quite actually hear what the problem exactly was, so I was wondering whether you could maybe frame this problem for us.
I don't know. It is, yes. I said it in the presentation now. Like, I don't, I mean, I totally could relate to this thing. I don't remember exactly when I said it, but it was not trying to solve a problem, more trying to, I mean, also the title of the conference was, again, a vocal amalgam of rapture and rupture. And we had also the presentations and then discussion panels, which were the disruptive part, which is also then a mixture of disruption, but we were trying to put this affix to the rapture, and the rapture in the notion of deliverance, of giving yourself up to any vocation or to any direction. And I guess this is what we see a problem, like a uni vision of anything. Like, we are for multilateral collaborations and cross-disciplinary things, cross-disciplinary panels, experiences and products that transcend this unilateral vision of thought or of action. So I guess this is the problem we recognized, which was, well, I don't know, we just wanted to mix things up a bit and invite people from abroad, also to Austria, to Vienna, to show a different, well, Zugang, like a different approach to topics that are global, or at least European, but still very localized in a way.
Thanks very much. I think it's interesting that, and we did mention this yesterday, that we are all speaking, of course, English, and it's a question again of these of this interactivity and interaction among this fairly internationalist sphere. I think this is why, in a way, we're all here. I want to ask Petra, because yesterday you said a very interesting thing for me, and that was that to speak English is the most artificial of the languages which you speak, and I just it keeps sort of ringing with me, and I'm wondering if you could maybe elaborate just how you meant that.
Well, now that you say it, it sounds a bit maybe dystopian, but I suppose that it is this kind of performative dimension that we have to put on, to wear on, and in most cases to also reconfigure maybe even our way of thinking according to these presets, to use certain words that have some sort of resonance in some sort of echoes in certain circles, if you and I think, of course, it may be some sort of an issue of power, that English currently, dominates this kind of spectrum of linguistics, and that maybe, I don't know, 100 years ago in the Eastern Europe it would have been German or French in different countries, and similarly people or thinkers would have had to do the same thing, to change the way they talk or think in order to have their own sort of voice heard. And I think this is it is some sort of a painful, I mean, maybe it's too much, but it is a sort of problematic compromise that we have to make in order to make our voices heard. So I think that's maybe the artificial shell that I was talking about is a bit of an exaggeration, but at the same time you have, and we were talking even today about it, that of course it depends on each of our identities and how we relate and how we make sense of what speaking in English entails. But at the same time, to us personally, it is a form of performing rather than being ourselves.
I really like this connection between artificiality and futurity, as we've been sort of discussing throughout. I'm wondering right now whether the audience has any questions or comments. We are very open. PMF has a long tradition of very round-tabled panels. If nobody at this moment, I would like to ask our invited guests whether they would like to comment on or ask on anything about anything they've seen over the past few days.
May I? I actually wanted to point out two things. First relates to your question that you have addressed to Daniel, and I obviously don't want to, I think I don't have the full answer, but if we formulate it in this problem-solution dichotomy, I would say the problem is the global, and the solution will be to embrace this kind of construction of translocality, where the accentuation of difference is capable, but also not only in the local, but also in the planetary level, or this kind of scale or interscalability of differences can be seen or envisioned. This is something that, for instance, for me personally, kind of interesting. And with regards to, for instance, Dustin's pitch, it made me realize that what I was always been speculating and trying to also somehow formalize in a rather discursive way, and that is that the society itself matters, but matters in the sense that it is actually a matter. It materializes. It embodies in various forms as a matter. I think you were very much nicely pointing this out. The societal is not only an abstraction, but it also always then re-emerges throughout the the matter, or to some degree it acts as a matter, or it has this kind of material aspect always. If we are just talking about like planetary logistics, it's just not the idea of the interconnectedness, but it's also a very like rough material, like fluctuation of goods, ideas, which again rematerialize themselves, etc. And this made me wonder that whether, if in that sense, if in this planetary context there is still a place for the various accents of locality, like what does like the locality brings into account when we talk about, for instance, like planetary computation, planetary infrastructures, and so forth, how this affects the locality and how the local then reflects itself in this kind of apparatus.
Any response?
Sure, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I suppose with kind of looking at the notion of infrastructure, absolutely, I'm interested in that planetary infrastructure aspect too. I mean, I didn't really emphasize this as much, and I kind of tailed off in the end, but as you're pointing out, these kind of localities or aspects of bioregionalism where, in essence, if we do look at the supply chains, we do look at the logistics, we look at our kind of interdependency or our kind of infrastructural unconsciousness in some respects, how that does, in a certain sense, shape cultures, it shapes perceptions, it shapes, certain ways of time and certain kind of expectations of it and so forth. Yeah, I suppose, kind of looking right now with kind of, or surveying what we could see with certain tendencies to want to strive for kind of alternative economies or alternative ways of configuring or shifting towards that direction. I think that's something I would really like to map out and see with kind of the ideas of futurisms and like Hungaro-futurisms. I mean, I would also ask you in this case too, what do you kind of see as the planetary infrastructural context, or what do you see as Hungaro-futurism kind of reflect or react to that in this case? Because you can talk about, especially now, we have these things such as DAOs emerging as well, and so this idea that you want to eliminate these kind of national characteristics and identities, and you give it over to, for example, machines and programs to be kind of running the operation of where you pool your funds in together, and through pooling your funds in together, that there's this idea of anonymity, but at the same time there's a questionable lack of narrative in this case, and this is what's actually kind of in the crypto space. There's this kind of question of what is going to be this narrative, this kind of lore, this way that's going to bring us to some type of unifying thread. And this is kind of what I'm working on right now, because I'm part of this Robinhood DAO, and it's nothing to do with nothing to do with Robinhood when it came to like the broker Robinhood, but yeah, so kind of using this lore of loot and pirating in this case is something that we can do. What their kind of former project was is that they were going to get like pools of people that you pay a $30 membership, and paying this $30 membership, you get involved in something like a cooperative hedge fund. And so it would be managed by all the people who are kind of in the group. And what the group would do is they would try to design strategies to, for example, look at certain stock prices on like, let's say, the S&P 500, so the 500 largest companies in the world. And based on this, they would try to create an algorithm. And what this algorithm would do is trying to mimic the strategies of the best types of investors that they can see who are making profits off margins or different bid spreads and so forth. And so what they would set up as well is the funds that they would be making from taking movements and positions in the stock market, is they would have like a Robinhood group where it would go into kind of these internal members where they would have some kind of livelihood, and then it would be half of the 50% of the funds would be going into kind of community-based projects in this case. And so the community-based projects, they would be raising over thousands of euros to be able to give to community spaces as well to hacker spaces, and also to other types of cooperative spaces. Unfortunately, their parasite algorithm, as they actually refer to it, it broke down. But I see this as somewhat of a model, and I think right now they're transitioning to doing something as a DAO. And so we have to really think about this kind of compelling narrative that you're going to come up with, and you have to think about, there's kind of certain like particularities where people are coming from, whether they're in, South America, or whether North America or Asia, and also even in Central Europe. And what you see is that kind of myth to come together, and you kind of converge upon something like Robinhood in this case. So, so I suppose that would be what I can I definitely would like to see that kind of idea about infrastructural narrative is also played out too.
But isn't this exactly hunger futurism? Like, it's an infrastructure narrative for mythopoetic action, no? I mean, this is how I perceive it. And this is like, when you're talking about it, I'm just thinking like, this is, I mean, what this is also like.
I think that's a good angle towards this whole thing, because okay, let's start this way. Hungary Future is actually not a successful thing in Hungary, within Hungary. It's super funny that I always have this kind of like very positive welcoming of this, or we have in this kind of like trans-regional Eastern European context. And what made me wonder is that it's not about the further perpetuation of this kind of essentialist thinking about nationhood or whatsoever. It's quite the opposite. It's about a kind of a welcoming of inviting other localities to form their own versions of futurities, and then put it into this kind of like, if we take the DAO as a metaphor, these decentralized autonomous organizations, like let's have a decentralized autonomous organizations of various futurities in our region, this kind of thinking. So Hungary Futurism is rather an invitation and not so much of a propagandist approach of an ideology or whatever that has its essentialist core meaning that wants to invade the rest of the world. Is quite the opposite. It's to invite the peripheries to unite.
Well, I find it interesting to speak of blockchain in the context of the art market, with there being sort of a boom of NFTs and NFT carried art. It seems that the NFT business is currently sort of undergoing a classic sort of art market development. On the other hand, the blockchain as a technology seems to kind of whisper about these, potentialities of alternatives, of alternative modes of finance, exchange, and ultimately perhaps community building in a traditional futurist sense. And I'm kind of wondering whether I'm on the ball with this particularly, whether maybe Dustin or Zsolt or anybody else who has experience with NFT art would make the same gamble in a way, that the blockchain is a technology which sort of harbors a lot of potential, but the question is, I suppose, who actually profits of it, so to speak.
Yeah, I mean, I don't see decentralization as like a Wunderwaffe itself in this case. I mean, that's the reality. I think this kind of term has been used a bit too promiscuously. I mean, what do we mean by anything being necessarily decentralized in this case? Because I can argue, if you look at our kind of global system, there is always aspects of certain types of corporations or certain types of distributors, supply chains, logistics, also computer servers. There's some sense of there always being something decentralized or not in one specific place in this case, but it's spread across the globe, because in some level you want some sense of redundancy, some sense of resilience that's built into the system to kind of perpetuate and continue the system, especially if it's based on infrastructure in this case. I mean, I mean, I'm not necessarily addressing with the NFT market. I mean, I'm not as familiar with it, even though we were talking about loot the other day, and I was kind of discussing about right now kind of this NFT market that's exploding, where basically what people are doing is, I guess you can call it a type of world building, bottom-up world building, where they actually just write descriptions of certain objects and possessions, whether it's swords, whether it's belts, whether it's wizard capes or wizard hats, whatever it may be. And they sell these descriptions, or these subscriptions, or they basically sell these descriptions, and these descriptions themselves kind of peddle value, and people are basically trying to auction and bid on them. And through their kind of auction and bidding on them, they start creating or generating some type of 2D pixelated art, or they might actually start building some type of just, image that for a lot of people, doesn't seem so appealing. But, for some, this is kind of, how can we imagine something like the blockchain of doing these kind of more or less bottom-up, world-making possibilities that people can come together and build their own mythologies and build their own kind of narratives that, of course, can be perhaps a collage of something where they're coming with their own particular identity, or is it, it can come to something where it's just a world of memification as well. So,
if I may interrupt you, because with Scholti we were also working on a project, and it's called the Hungerofuturist Corona. The Hungerofuturist Corona. So it is a coin. It is not an NFT. It is a token. And I mean, we didn't come as far as we would have liked, because it's more, again, like a huge idea. But it's still like, I think it is exactly around this topic. Like, the idea would be to create a community-based currency that they exist. I mean, in autonomous communities, or there is even like in Linz, where the Ars Electronica is based, there is a Ghibling, and they have kind of concessions with different bars and museums and whatever, where you can pay in Ghibling. And the idea is that every year there is a new Ghibling, and the Ghiblings also devaluate. After 7 years they lose their value. So like that's how they cope with the inflation. But our idea was to make a Hungerofuturist crown, a Hungerofuturist Corona, introduce it in the Pannonian Basin to create exactly this community. And the idea would be to make out of every bill an NFT, so a poetic, inspirational Hungerofuturist text, like something that converts you to Hungerofuturism. If you use it, then you are Hungerofuturist, and it's like a secret handshake you give,
But also it has this kind of necro-economic aspect, so that through poetry you can overinflate the Hungarian forint, so that it ends up in the total collapse of the Hungarian economy, and therefore it will then make like a fresh start. So you have like a blank paper, so that you can start building up a new community. So this kind of like self-fulfilling prophecy, or whatever you were talking about, this is precisely like encoded in this idea of this necro-economic endeavor.
Yeah.
We're talking largely about, of course, global or digital superstructures and infrastructures to our finance, and we've adopted a sort of very macro perspective, I guess, which is a standard with futurism. I'm wondering, as a counterpoint, I would like to ask Rahel about her work, which she showed yesterday, the Fabrica Seduction film. You can review it. That's PMF Day 2 on our YouTube channel. And I'd like to ask about the futurity, in a way, of within perhaps affect theory, within our charting of individuality, subjectivity, and the way it can be automated, it can be profited upon, channeled or coerced, and to what degree it might not be. If I understood the film, it's a type of motivational video for sort of self-help dreariness of our post-liberal condition, in a way, and I'm wondering whether that's about right.
Yeah, it's literally the intention was to create literally a mind coach, like the first appearance of a mind coach service, but kind of in a way where, in a naked way, because this culture, as the existing like examples of this on YouTube and Instagram exactly play with these certain elements and like psychological effects and all the evil things that I say or the robot voice say in the video. But we wanted to make one which is clear about its bad intentions, but still like enchanting to fall into this trap, basically. And so yeah, and the idea, yeah, we didn't get so far with this project as we wanted to by now, but as well. But the idea is to actually make this book that was mentioned in the video in basically the same manner, and to create all the elements of this community that exists on YouTube and that publishes, you know, some ebooks, some material that you can actually buy and hypnotize yourself and do the affirmations and meditations and do some more videos. That's the future of it. And in this case, the future is basically this loop of, I mean, it's non-existent, so we are back to this cancelled future, because you are sitting basically in front of a screen in a loop of self-hypnosis. So it's probably we are not so far with it, because it's maybe painful is like a radical word to use, but it's kind of difficult sometimes to work on it, because it has its fun aspect, but it's the main thing is to get into this villain character, which is exhausting. I don't know if I answered.
Absolutely, thank you. Are there any questions or comments from the audience? Anyone at all? I find that hard to believe. Are there any reflections from the panelists? Comments, questions?
Maybe. I mean, sorry if I talk too much, because just I want to throw into the floor, like, again, this alliances of myths, or these kind of connections that I think it's super important to have these concrete examples what in the Hungarofuturism is the Pannonian Basin, like a geological base of connection that transcends human existence, that it's not, that it exists even without anything else existing on the planet, like living. So in this sense, otherwise, like my connection to Budapest is, I don't know, like the past of the crown or the Count K monarchy, and like something that it's totally constructed, no? So I think for this type of alliances, this geological reflection is super, it's very heavy and a very good starting point. So I'm just thinking like in a Visegrad sense, or even like what could be a possible connection. And we already were talking about the Danube, but this excludes the Czech Republic. So maybe just something to think about. It's a task.
I would maybe like to ask Zsolt in this regard. You mentioned that there's a concept in Moani's work, who is also associated with the Hungarofuturism, was published in the Xenotopia magazine, which is available again in the back, that there is this concept of interfuturity, if I'm not mistaken. Interfuturity, and that Yes, yes, and that it largely rests in mapping out a type of topology of the interactions and the diffraction effects of these various futurities overlapping as a type of patchwork. And I'm wondering whether you could maybe elaborate on this concept within perhaps even the conversation we've been having and the geographical region wider of the CEE.
Yeah, so this interfuturity aspect, I think, can be traced back to the essay of Mahan Moalemi, who was also co-editing a German book that came up by Mehrere Verlag in 2017, entitled Ethnofuturisms. This is a really nice catalog of various, futurities or futuristic endeavors that are actually not really, colliding with each other otherwise, because they simply have such different visions. Like, let's say, Xenofuturism and China, this kind of dystopian realism that is unfolding, in front of our very eyes, or let's say the Gulf futurism or the whole Gulf region has its completely different take on the monopolization of what the envisioning of future could look like. Or if you talk about the historicity of Afrofuturism and its various forms, to where it unfolded throughout the centuries has its own trajectory. So nevertheless, what Mahan suggests is this kind of sensibility for the various, understanding of futurities that are actually, not competing with each other and not, neglecting each other, but they are also capable of being radiating within each other, or like cross-contaminate with each other. And I think this is where the interesting, aspect of this relational futurism could start. But talking of the geo-speculative aspect of futurities, for instance, I hope you don't mind, Laura and Petrika, if I share to the audience that we are in the midst of a bargaining, because I always had this problem that, of course, with Trianon we lost 2/3 of our territory, but I think Hungary has still too much space. It should be shrink into a size of Liechtenstein. That would be an optimal, or San Marino. So I was trying to negotiate with Petrika and Laura if they could take the like another half of Hungary, so it would like then being part of Romania, and in return we would just ask for a tunnel that they would pay, obviously, so that there will be a Hungaro-futurist hyperloop towards the Black Sea. We would only need this kind of like entry to the Black Sea. So, okay, of course it's just a joke to some degree, but then there's this kind of training of this geo-speculative or geopoetic envisioning that actually makes sense on the other hand, because the history of science fiction per se is nothing but this kind of constant training of the geo-speculative capacity of our mind or of imagination. So I don't know if we are agreed on the the details, but it's in making.
Yeah, we're still negotiating, right?
Still negotiating.
Jod, I think it's only a joke if you still believe in the nation state. But this is something that was said at the beginning that is still echoing with me, and it comes back to what Dustin was talking about, and is partly what he was talking about when you were discussing the historical framework of Marx and the critique of capital, and how capital is never been an indexical term. There's nothing you can point to and actually call capitalism. And this is one of the sort of recurring motifs in theory today about whether capitalism died and has been reincarnated, or is, as you said, is this kind of in a constant state of transition of some sort. But what keyed me into this was the two things, because that joke about sort of ceding territory and whatnot, of course, happens all the time through the privatization and corporatization of apparent sovereign territories and the kinds of trade deals that are struck, the Trans-Pacific trade deal, for example, that cedes sovereignty, which is the sacred word in Britain, sovereignty to the market, and the state, or that the instruments of the state, like parliaments and whatnot, can't make decisions that would infringe upon the potential to earn profits in the future, and so on and so forth. And this has brought me back to what you were saying at the beginning about the performative sort of character of speaking English, and sort of the alienation that sort of, and the artificiality of that, and this curious sort of coincidence, historical coincidence of how Marx is talking about capital at a time when capital is still conceived in terms of fixed capital and fixed values, transitioning to something else that was rather inconceivable at the time, and how language is also somehow fixed in that historical moment. We talk about English and we talk about Portuguese, and we don't talk about Brazilian, we don't talk about American or Australian or Jamaican. And the fact is that we still have these terms that seem somehow to be indexical, that points to England as the origin of the English language, and yet when you actually look at it, English has this completely mongrelized, bastardized origin, and its sovereignty has always been in question. And added to that, the process by which it emerged, stripping it of its various sort of grammatical characteristics, so it's the most analytical and hence sort of artificial language. Its history is a little bit like the commodity. It's stripping away of these sort of linkages to territory and sovereignty to produce this free-floating thing that avails itself of this form of global communication, in a sense, without necessarily tying people back to the sense of who owns the discourse. And the sort of the myth that English is the language of some kind of colonial or imperial power is precisely that. It's just a myth, So anyway, that's the joke, perhaps, of the tyranny of the English language.
The joke's on us, it seems. We're slowly getting to the end of the panel. I'd like to once again thank all our invited guests, and I would once again like to bid the audience, if there are any comments or questions to any of the panelists. If not, there's a lot to talk about. Obviously, we've just broached some of these issues and themes and topics, and I'm personally looking forward to unpacking them in the coming months and years and minutes. So, without further ado, I'd like to invite you to the bar, and now we will be screening the videos, promotional videos of our affiliated publishing houses. So stay tuned, and at 9 o'clock we have Noemi with a set. So stay tuned, stay with us. From left to right, I would like to once again wholeheartedly thank our guests: Laura Naum, Petre Mogos, Rahul Molnar, Janina Weissengruber, Dustin Breitling, Louis Armand. My name is Vít Bohal. To my left is Scholt Mixels-Folgi, and Daniel Hitler finishes it off. Thank you very much for staying with us.
Thank you.